guys.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Welcome back to Brokenness Meets Grace.
Yep.
And we're breaking down the heroes of the Bible. We hope that you enjoyed our previous talk on Moses and his shortcomings as a person, his brokenness, and how God used his story to basically glorify himself. Today,
Exciting. I think it's good to always bring in a female perspective. I honestly think there's more emphasis on male heroes than there are women heroines.
yeah,
And I don't know if it's just the way of the world, I suppose. And there's not much celebrated about female heroines in the Bible, and there's actually a lot of big names in the Bible who are women who did great things, who God used to do great and wonderful things. And I think this season, or the segment rather, about Brokenness Meets Grace, podcast is a great way to just highlight these women and just break it down. And today we have the one and only Mary, right? We know the name Mary. People say this name all the time, but I think she is really one of a kind for many reasons. But the most important was that she was the mother of our Lord Jesus, and I mean, that alone should just give her, great levels on another level. So
she's a goat.
She really is. She really is. And of course, she was human, right? And yes, she was a great woman, but she was imperfect just like us. And this segment is really just to highlight what could have been. We were not there, but we are using the Bible as reference. We're using historical accounts as reference. And we're just trying to, figure out what life for Mary could have been like, or what was it like from a human element, to just be able to relate to her a little bit more.
So fast forward, we know what happens after they leave their hometown, and we know the story. Now Jesus is born, and he grows into a young man. He grows into a man, and his ministry starts.
Yeah.
What does Mary go through here?
All right. So obviously, just to backtrack it a bit, and we'll come back again. Even after he was born, right, it was still this hassle because people want to kill Jesus as a baby. People are trying to get rid of this so-called king that is born, because all these signs and wonders happened when he was born. Shepherds and angels singing, and Persian princes coming and giving him gifts. So for them, you can imagine just that instability with the newborn baby running from country to country, and trying to settle and trying to find a place where they can raise a child, and they're still also trying to maneuver marriage as newlyweds, and it's all just very disorientating. But once it settles down after a while, and they're not running for their life, they finally settle as a family, and more children then come thereafter. And Jesus has siblings, and Jesus is growing up, and there's brothers and there's sisters, and now it's becoming a fully lived in house, right? There's a whole lot going on, but there's a lot of stuff that I've read, and that's just really given me a perspective of what life could have been like, not only for Mary but for Jesus' siblings as well, because you're quite literally living with God in your house. Right?
A perfect sibling is the worst.
A perfect sibling, a perfect child. You need to understand, for her as a mother, it's already difficult for mothers to raise too many children because of personality dynamics and just trying to mother equally, right? But you cannot mother equally with different children.
Exactly.
It's very difficult, and trying to find that balance is hard, right? I'm not a mother, of course, but I'm just speaking from the outside looking in. So now, can you imagine trying to mother children who are human and trying to mother God?
Basically.
Can you imagine the stresses for her, because she has to now make these ones who don't understand that this is the Son of God, right? And that dynamic in the household, what that would look like, because they're getting reprimanded, he isn't, right? They are getting called out, he isn't, and it's now building animosity within the children, and you kind of need to balance and manage that kind of home. And you've got a husband here as well who should be the son's father, but really isn't, because the son keeps referring to father as his God and not this fleshly man, and that kind of dynamic maybe as well could have also just jarred Joseph, because he's actually the real father to the other siblings, but technically not to Jesus. So
Sure.
you just think of all of those, and these are real life dynamics that we experience
As
today in
people.
our homes. What more for Mary, the Mary, and the Joseph?
Yeah.
But it was real for them too. And I think in a heightened level, because how do you deal with that?
Yes. And that's the thing. Parenting is a crazy business on
Yeah.
its own, at least if you're doing it right. There's no manual for it. There's no way you're going to do it perfectly.
Yeah.
But can you imagine having to consciously understand that you're not just parenting anybody? And I think in a lot of ways, the character of Jesus was a constant reminder of that.
Yeah.
I can imagine how there must have been so many instances where he called her to order, directly or indirectly.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And, often when your kids want something from you or whatever, and you say no, and they're like, why? And you're like, because I said so. Like, can you imagine having that sort of dynamic with Jesus? Like, because I said so, and you're like, okay, and you are. I don't think Jesus would have made it difficult. I think he was a super respectful child.
He understood authority.
But I think that in itself would have been jarring for her as well. Because how do you get mad? How do you get irritated? How do you contain yourself? How do you guard the rest? And how do you play sort of, that role? And it must have been very frustrating, but also exhausting for her to have to navigate between parenting one way and parenting another way. Also because she didn't really have a reference, she didn't have a reference. Yes, she was raised, but she was raised like conservatively Jewish, and there's a way that they did things. And as much as they might have raised all their kids that way, there was also a difference in how they had to approach it with Jesus, I'm sure. So identity again, because now I have to form a different identity here. I have to now rediscover my role as a mother, and how do I do that when I don't know, because this has never been done.
And maybe she would have felt that she's doing it wrong
all the time, all the time. So
true.
Identity, self-esteem, confidence, and also just fear. Fear that I'm either gonna mess it up so badly that all of humanity
I could doom the whole world.
is doomed because of me.
Yeah.
Because that's what we start thinking as people. Mind you, God never told Mary, you're going to bring this life into the world and then I'm going to let you raise it and I'm going to leave you. But the assumption we take on when we take on a purposeful role or an assignment is that it's mine to do and I have to carry the weight to do it. I have to be the one that makes sure that it's done perfectly. And we forget the fact that we actually didn't send ourselves to do it. So it's always this tug of war between us and our own strength, and us and trying to be perfect at it, and us and trying to carry it out. And God just sitting there waiting and saying, but I'm here.
I didn't even ask you to do it.
You didn't have to bust your back trying to be this perfect mother, And I think that was also the conflict that she was having, because she felt so responsible for this assignment. She felt like, I've been entrusted with this and I cannot fail at it. And it's a heavy cross to bear. Excuse the pun. It's a heavy cross to bear. So for her, I think she struggled with a lot of that identity and self-esteem and just conviction and confidence as a mother, as a woman. She battled a lot with that.
And I think just pressure, I think she really may have had this self-inflicted pressure that I have to do this right. I have to get it right, know. And every time she felt she wasn't, it was like a dig or a thingy at her.
Absolutely.
That I'm messing it up. And I mean, naturally, parents feel that way when their children disappoint them or whatever. But I think it was even more jarring for her because he was perfect. Do you understand?
Sinless.
He was sinless. Yeah. So it was just a different level of pressure for her, and I'm sure she had to always, and there might have even been conflict between her and Joseph.
Absolutely.
In that regard too, and how to raise them, and how to raise him, and how to interact with one and the other. There's a part in scripture that does really just give us reference into what that dynamic looked like when Jesus was missing and he went to the synagogue, and they couldn't find him as a child. I think he was like 12 or something. And they were frantic, and all the kids are there. Everybody's accounted for except Jesus, and Mary and Joseph are looking everywhere for him, and they can't find him. Eventually, they end up going, because they cannot leave everybody waiting for this one child, And I'm sure that must have been a very difficult decision to make as a mom and a father. But eventually, I think it was Joseph who came back looking for him, and he found him. And he was like, where have you been? We've been frantically looking for you. And Jesus was just like, I've been in my father's house, you know, about my business, you know. So even that kind of
and how do you ground
what do you say
what
to
you
that?
do?
What do you
and
say
there has
to
to be
that?
consequence because his siblings are looking at him thinking,
Do you
oh, so that's
understand? So I can go,
you know,
to the synagogue.
but how do you argue with the child for telling you that?
know,
so yeah,
it's that
must have
type
been
of
very difficult.
volatile dynamics. I'm sure
And
that
another
household
thing-
looked like.
Another thing that I think Mary also might have, you know, because there might have been some resentment from her personally for all the people that called her a liar, all the people that told her, when you lied, you were not a virgin, you were an adulteress, you know, and the resentment. And I imagine she always was holding out for, and I told you so moment.
A vindication.
You know what I mean? Because that's what we are as people. We're people, you know, and she must have always been waiting for a moment to prove them wrong.
Yeah.
You know, that moment where God shows up and the stage is set and he's like, ha!
Told you.
You know? And
he's the son of God.
He's the son of God, you know? And I mean, that moment took a long time to come, but even when that moment came, eventually it didn't come the way that she thought it would, you know? And for her, I think it might have been a lot of resentment towards God in her journey as a mother, in her journey in raising Jesus, because I think she might have always been waiting, you know, for that moment where something supernatural happens and the whole, all the people that dogged her, you know, all the people that called her a liar could see, you know, because our reputation, our image is everything. And when we lose that as people, it damages us, you know, and we want vindication and we want people to know I was telling the truth. And I think because God's timing is not ours and the way we do things is certainly isn't the way that he does things, I think Mary might also have struggled a lot with some resentment and some anger, you know, along the road to say, I did what you told me to do. I did it the way you said I must do it, you know. It cost me so much pain. What was in it for me, you know?
And I'm sure, right, up more than anything when Jesus died, you know, when he was crucified, I think for her that might have been even the most keen moment where she felt that this is it, really?
You know, all of that for this. And maybe she had an understanding that it's something that had to happen, you know, and maybe she had enough time to actually come to terms with it happening. But I think in a lot of ways, she might have dealt with a lot of anger, you know, as a mother, you know, but also the sacrifices. I mean, we call God out for a lot, eh? He comes and we take instructions from him and we do difficult things. We cut off ties with people that he says we must. We end relationships, we uproot families, we lose everything because we want to be obedient and because we want to be purposeful. But I think in the back of our minds, we're always expecting vindication and a reward of some sort, you know. And when we don't get it, it becomes, why did you tell me to do this? I listened to you. I did things the way you wanted me to do them. What was in it for me? And we forget that purpose is not about us.
That's so true.
You know,
and I mean, I'm sure, like you're saying, you're very right. It was possibly just layers of bitterness and resentment and anger and frustration and impatience, because she even had to raise children on her own at some point because Joseph died.
Exactly.
You know, and now she's left as a single parent, not only to God, but to all these other children. And now she needs to kind of figure out that dynamic, you know, and I, like I mentioned to you before, it was a very patriarchal time. And the men were really the people who ran the household. You know, so as a woman, it was very difficult for you to function without a male figure in your house. And Jesus kind of stepped up to that role as soon as Joseph died, because he now, as the firstborn son, had to assume responsibility. But even still, you know, you are not the husband, you are the son. And there's a certain level of responsibility that is expected from the husband than there is to the son. So I think most of it still fell on her, you know, and she still had to be the matriarch and just run the ship the way that it needed to. But I can imagine that she was haggard and tired, you know, and she wasn't very old even, you know, so it must have just been a very heavy assignment right up until the end for her.
And I imagine a lot of times she had conversations with God and she might have said things like, I didn't ask for this, you know, like, why me, you know, and the why factor must have crept up so many times. Like, you could have chosen anybody. Why me? And you know,
I'm the wrong person.
I'm the wrong person. And for those of us who have asked that question time and time again, we know that you don't get an answer to it. You know, if anything, it just frustrates you even more because it just feels like you're speaking into nothingness. You know, because at that time, all you want to hear is an actual, like a definite
A real
answer,
audible answer.
And God doesn't operate on our emotions. He doesn't operate that way. But I just imagine that was the frustration for her.
But I think really the answer is the fact that he keeps empowering us to keep doing it. That is the why. It's not necessarily because of this, but you're still doing it. So that is
and
why.
I'm carrying you.
So that means there's still more to be done, and you are the person that I'm choosing to do it through.
Absolutely. Definitely. So then, of course, Jesus dies on the cross. He was crucified. And the only people that are left at the site of the crucifixion are Mary, of course, his mother, Mary Magdalene, and John.
Yes, and a few other women too.
As well, and wow, I can't even begin to imagine the kind of pain she must have experienced in that moment, the fact that she couldn't save him, the fact that she knew it must be done, like he had to die. Even the moments leading up to his death, the fact that she knew that the time was coming closer and closer and closer, and there's nothing you can do to protect your baby. There's nothing you can do to save him from it. And what's worse is understanding that you are also part of the reason that he came to do this business. You're also part of the reason that he came to lay his life down. And surprisingly, still being the one who remembered the fact that he would rise again, and where that line, like having to find that balance between I've just lost him, but I know he's coming back. So Mary is just, she's such a layered character. But look at what came from her, Look at what came from her brokenness. Salvation, like for all of us, She brought life into the world, and the same life that she brought into the world was taken brutally, from her. But because of the sacrifice that she made, and as she navigated through her own personal brokenness, through raising Jesus, through being the wife of Joseph and the mother of James, it was such a hectic journey for a person to go through, But I imagine she found herself the moment he rose. I think that was the pinnacle. That was the why. He came back and it made sense. Everything that she went through was justified in that moment, justified through him, justified through his sacrifice. And we often talk about how the wall of fame in heaven, and how Paul writes about the stage being set and all of these heroes that passed on. He talks about Abraham, he talks about Elijah. We need to put Mary's name there as well.
Definitely. And I think her story also tells us how our belief in Jesus is an individual experience. That even his siblings, because there's a point where Jesus is at the cross and there's specific things that he says, and one of them is to John that Mary is now his mother, and John is now his son, right? And you need to understand as well that in that moment, he's in pain, he can hardly breathe, he can hardly talk. So whatever is being said in that moment is very specific, very intentional, and it's very important. So if that was a statement that he mentioned in his dying moment, it was very important. And I think for me, really, what I take away from that is that the reason Jesus basically gave John to Mary and Mary to John, because Mary still had other sons, right? She still had other children. But he chose John because John was spiritually mature. John had believed in Christ. John had believed in God, right? And Mary as well believed that Jesus was the Christ and Jesus was the Messiah. But James didn't. His other siblings didn't, right? And it just, for me, highlights the fact that everybody's spiritual journey is individual. You have to literally experience it, but also believe it and claim it. And he couldn't have said to Mary, your son is James, because James didn't believe in him.
As a deity.
He didn't.
Spiritually.
Do you understand? So James needed to come into his own before Mary could basically go back to him, for lack of a better word. And James had to go through his own experience. And I think at the end, when one of the books that is written in the Bible at the end of the epistles and stuff is James's book, and it just, you can hear it in his tone that he was very conflicted growing up with Jesus. I think he really, really had a lot of resentment towards Jesus because he couldn't match up to this perfection, to the standard. And Mary was always doting over him, And I think he literally was leveled to the point where he finally understood that I had it wrong this whole time.
He was
you know,
Christ.
and he had to have that experience in his own way. But we cannot piggyback off of
Someone
other
else's experience.
regardless of whether Jesus was your brother or not. You literally have to accept and believe and declare him as who he is for him to basically
have an impact
in your life.
Definitely.
You know, and that's really just what I took away from that moment at the cross. But also just to, you know, add what you were saying about that the 2 days where I'm sure she was just holding out hope, a mother's hope as well. You know, I'm pretty sure there was doubt there. But it's just this mother's hope where she was like, he said he would come back. He said he would come back. And he will, you know. And it was that, I think also that was honored more than anything. Yes, Jesus rose because that's what he set out to do. But in a beautiful way, I think he was also honoring his mother's wish.
Yeah.
You know,
so beautiful.
And it takes it back to also the wedding in Canaan, when she was the one to say, do this, and implementing his miracles. That's when he really started now preaching and ministering after his mother said, this is now the time for you.
And I mean, look at that. That's God's grace. You know, I think Mary was holding out for a reward that she had all along. You know, the reward was him, you know, and that's what purpose is. Like, if we learn to understand that, yes, you know, we say yes to the most difficult things that he asks us to do, and we keep sitting and waiting for that moment of reward. But the grace is the reward. Having him is the reward, you know.
Being acknowledged by
him is everything, you know. Paul said it, to live is Jesus, to die is Jesus. Like, it's just, it's him. It's all about him. And Mary had that reward all along. And I think, you know, closer to the end, she realized that she's always had the reward, that's what it was for, you know. And of course, God has carried her through all of that. You know, his grace was sufficient. Through raising them, you know, through losing her husband, through losing her son, you know, she found salvation and she found purpose. In a culture that ridiculed women, you know, in a culture that said women would amount to nothing but being a wife and a mother, and that was it. Her name was etched into history, you know, and that is amazing. That is phenomenal, because she chose to live a life purposefully, even as broken as she was, you know, even with her identity stripped, her honor stripped, you know, having lost her family, having lost herself at some point, not understanding who she is, who she must become. Her honor was gone, but her name is etched into history today, you know, because she was instrumental in God pulling the biggest heist of eternity, like the biggest, you know, miracle. I there's no words to fully describe the coming and the death of Christ. But had she not said yes, that would have never been a reality, you know. True. And again, that's how God does it. He takes what we are in our broken state, in our broken pieces, and he has a view of something beautiful, even when we can't see it.
If you trust him.
Exactly. And Mary had no view of that. All she was working on was broken fragments of her life as it came, play by play, from the time that she had to leave her home and become a mother to the time that she had to raise them. And every day for her was just another crack, you know, another break, another, you know, falling apart. But for him, it was part of the journey, part of the process in creating this beautiful piece of work that is salvation, you know, that is the restoration of man to God through one human being and her brokenness.
And for me, like, my biggest takeaway when Mary is concerned is just how she really is the benchmark for phenomenal, independent, single women. Absolutely. You know, single mothers. She really just heroes that for me more than anything. Heroes the real struggle of just, you know, grafting as a woman in a very hostile culture, in a culture that doesn't promote, you know, or encourage support, you know, with very limited resources. Like, that is the reality of many women.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think she really is like the epitome of just courage. In a story like that.
Definitely. And believing in your child, you know. The world at some point was like ridiculing Jesus. You know, he was really crazy. He was weird. He was this, he was that. And she stood by her child. because she knew. And maybe some would say, of course, she stood by him. She knew he was God. But I think, Mary's journey with Christ, raising him anyways, I think she raised him as a child. Because
I think it was very ordinary.
like he was a child to her, of course she knew he was superhuman, but she was always a mother and she stood by him, and like you're saying, that's our role as parents, no matter how difficult it gets, no matter how hard the situation is, we need to keep pushing. Because we don't know what we are cultivating. We are feeding into generations to come through this role that we've been given to raise them. And with Mary, it was quite the planting.
She was a formidable woman.
Absolutely.
She really, really was.
From brokenness to grace. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember, it may be broken, but it's in the hands of the potter. Catch you next time, guys.